What's up, everyone? Welcome into DodgerHeads Live, presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel. I am joined by Daniel Starkin. We appreciate you joining us. This is going to be a new thing. We're going to go live every Monday night at 9 p.m., talking Dodgers every week from here on out. And tonight we got a good show. Tonight we're going to be talking, as you see in the title, we're going to be talking about the Dodgers infield and what we look ahead to in 2021. The infield is loaded with storylines. Justin Turner is a free agent. There are trade rumors about Nolan Arenado, Francisco Lindor. You could throw Chris Bryant in there. You've got Corey Seager extension talks. There's lots to talk about. We've got Daniel Starkin, our resident Corey Seager expert, on hand, so that is a good thing. But yeah, so we appreciate you joining us. Some of you might be coming over from Trevor Lane's show over at Lakers Nation. That's our sister site. And so we're going to try and tag team this a little bit. So he goes on at 8, we go on at 9. But again, tonight we're going to be talking about the Dodgers in 2021, the infielders. If you missed it, last week I sat down with Justin Lorber, who's kind of our go-to guy for prospects and that kind of thing. We talked about back end of the roster, 40-man, that kind of stuff. But this week, we're looking to the big stuff. Justin Turner, Corey Seager, Gavin Lux, etc. And so be sure to stick around for that. But before we dive in any of that, we have a special guest with us tonight, and that's Daniel Starkin. This is a Los Angeles hero. You might not know this, but Daniel Starkin is a Los Angeles hero. He is owner of Scattergories, which is a great game. But I think you're the only person in history to rent out a board game in exchange for a signed NBA jersey. And I told the people that we would get a story time tonight. And so, Daniel, I got to hear the story. How did you end up with a signed NBA jersey in exchange for renting out a copy of Scattergories?
Yeah, I definitely think I came out ahead in that one. First thing I want to say is this new banner down here is pretty cool. Home of the World Series champs. That's what we are.
Not too bad.
So that's pretty cool. And second of all, I hope everyone had a good Thanksgiving. It wasn't,
you had a good Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm getting there. I mean, I feel like everyone was just kind of with their immediate family. We couldn't have large gatherings, but hopefully everyone made the most of it. It actually ended up being a very eventful Thanksgiving for me, like you hinted at there. But yeah, so I'll get right into it. Thursday night, it was literally like right as my family was like sitting down for Thanksgiving dinner, I see on Twitter that Dudley from the Lakers tweeted out like, hey, like, does anyone in the LA area have Scattergories that I could borrow? So I immediately responded. My family loves Scattergories. In fact, we had like literally just played that afternoon. It's one of our favorite games.
Game.
So I responded. I was like, hey, Duds, like, come to Burbank and play with me and my family. And I literally didn't even put my phone down. Like 30 seconds later, I get a notification that Jared Dudley followed me on Twitter. And then about 30 more seconds after that, I get a DM from him that basically said, like, hey, like, can I borrow it? Like, I'll send an Uber to come pick it up. And I was like, yeah, like, absolutely. Like, you're Jared Dudley. Like, for those of you who don't know Jared Dudley, he's like one of the last guys on the bench of the Lakers. He's like a 14-year vet. He's been in the league a long time, but he's like legitimately one of the most charismatic dudes in the whole NBA. He's hilarious. He's done interviews with Trevor and Lakers Nation, and it's great every time. So Jared Dudley, he's just a really good guy, and he ended up basically offering me a signed jersey in exchange for letting him borrow Scattergories for the night so him and his family can play. But yeah, so about 10 minutes after he DM'd me, there was an Uber.
He sent an Uber. He sent an Uber to pick this up.
Yeah. And it wasn't just a normal Uber. It was like one of the nice Ubers where it's like a big black SUV.
He wanted to take care of your game, man. He wanted to take care of the game.
And probably the funniest part of it all is I don't think the Uber driver knew what was going on. I think he just called an Uber to my house. So like the Uber driver gets there and I like hand him a board game and he's like looking at me all confused. Like, what's going on? Like, why aren't you getting in the car? And I was like, oh no, like, I'm not getting in. You're just taking that game. Tell Jared I say thanks and I appreciate it and I hope he enjoys it.
Did you tell him he was dropping it off at a Lakers house, or did you play it cool?
I didn't. I didn't want to blow up, Duds' spot. I mean, I think it says his name, so maybe he would have known. But yeah, so that was Thursday on Thanksgiving. And it's pretty funny, like, while all this was going on, my family was like sitting down for dinner and my mom's like, Daniel, get off your phone. And I was like, Mom, like, I'm texting Jared Dudley from the Lakers right now. Like, I'll be off in a few. And she started cracking up. but yeah, he ended up being a man of his word. He not only did he send me the game back over the weekend, but he also sent me this signed jersey.
Look at that.
So now I have a signed Jared Dudley jersey. I'm debating whether I want to get it framed or what I want to do with it. It's unfortunately he probably couldn't tell by my Twitter picture that I'm 6'4", so he sent me a size small.
Oh
So
no.
unfortunately, it doesn't fit me, but it's all right. I think I want to frame it or something, anyways, just for the memory.
Yeah, that is. My first question was, what was mom's take on this whole thing? Because Thanksgiving table, like, is mom crushing you for being
Yeah,
on your phone? It sounds like a little bit, but I
yeah,
imagine mom is a Laker fan. Like, she gets it a little bit,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. She didn't know who Jared Dudley
Okay,
was, which
fair,
I
which is
mean,
fair, which is fair.
yeah. Yeah, she's not the biggest fan. She'll watch games, but yeah. But as soon as I told her, like, I'm texting a Laker, she was actually the one who ran and like got the game ready for him. So she was loving it. My sister was loving it. It was just laughs all around. They didn't actually think that he would
No.
come through and send the jersey, but hey, Jared Dudley is a man of the people.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I would not. I would say. Yes. I mean, it's hard to guess sizes. I don't know if I'd go small though. I feel like if I was Dudley, I feel like I would. I
Yeah,
would guess large because I'm a medium guy. But if you give me a large, like I'll make it work.
yeah,
Small. I've got questions
yeah,
about the decision making there. But he's probably also thinking like, hey, this guy's not probably gonna wear it, and a small is probably easier to frame than a large. So maybe he's looking out for
yeah.
you. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thankful he sent
it's
anything.
amazing.
He really didn't have to do that. I was happy to give him the game regardless. But hey, that's as cool as it gets right there.
Well, there you go. I know we promised Dodger talk, and we spent the first 5 minutes talking Lakers, but we've
Yeah.
got lots of questions. Luis Ortega's talking about should we bring Justin Turner back? Pika Peep Scott, is the NL going to keep the DH rule? We are going to get to all of this. We appreciate you guys joining us. We've got a good crowd in here on Periscope, on Facebook, on YouTube. So be sure to comment, chat along with us. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Please sign up for notifications. Starting this week, we're going to start putting out one video at least a day reacting to breaking news, putting out news stories. So you're definitely going to want to have your notifications on that side. Luis is also asking about Keeper Ruiz. So we're going to be there. Should we re-sign Seager? Babu and Landon ask. We're going to get to all that. We're going to start, like I said, this is part 2 of a 5-part series talking about different segments of the Dodger roster. We started with the back end. We started with the prospects last week. If you missed that, please go out and check it out. But tonight is all about the infield. The reason we start with the infield is where the excitement is. It's where Justin Turner may or may not be. It's where Corey Seager may or may not be 2 years from now. And so we're going to start with that. We've also got Gavin Lux, a storyline, Will Smith, all sorts of things. So let me start with the basics, Daniel, and just give a quick overview here. As of right now, the following guys are on the 40-man roster for the Dodgers when it comes to the infield. Will Smith, Austin Barnes, Keibert Ruiz at catcher. And then you've got Matt Beatty, Gavin Lux, Zach McKinstry, Max Muncy, Edwin Rios, Corey Seager, and plus Chris Taylor kind of in that hybrid role. If you haven't heard of McKinstry, Justin Lorber gave a great breakdown of him on our last one. He's a prospect that if Kiki Hernandez is not re-signed, will likely take that role almost entirely. And speaking of Kike and Justin Turner are the notable free agents. And so even right now, if we just were to start the season today, you probably figure Edwin Rios gets a lot of time at third base. You've got Gavin Lux, Zach McKinstry, Chris Taylor at second base in some combination. And so just as a foundation point with Muncy at first, Smith behind the plate, and Corey Seager at short, even if nothing were to change, which neither of us expects to happen, but even if nothing were to change, that's a pretty remarkable group for the Dodgers to have without having done anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we talk about, how key Justin Turner is to this team. So I'd say he's probably number one on the list of guys to bring back. Like you said, though, they do have depth
Yeah.
throughout the infield with some of the young guys they got coming up. So even if they don't bring back Turner, they could definitely, manage and get by. I for one would take pleasure in watching a full season of Edwin Rios in the lineup
Yeah.
every day, just to see how many home runs he would hit. I think I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure he is the leader in baseball history in home runs per at bat. So a full season of him would be fun. He's probably more suited for a DH. I don't know if you want him as your everyday third baseman. So even if Turner doesn't come back, I would expect them to make a move there. But yeah, other than that, they're pretty much set at every other position. We'll probably see more Gavin
Yeah.
Lux in 2021. We know Chris Taylor can move around all over the place. If they don't bring Kike back, he's your main utility guy, and then Zach McKinstry kind of becomes the second utility guy. And of course, they still have Matt Beatty too, who could play first base and a little bit of third, and as well as the corner outfield. So yeah, they're set with depth. So I think if they are to make a acquisition, it would be either re-signing Justin Turner or like a high-end type move.
Yeah, well, there's lots to talk about. We're going to break it down position by position. Just looking at the chat real quick, Miguel Arroyo said Trevor Lane sent you. We appreciate it. We appreciate you checking out Trevor.
Thanks,
Like
Trevor.
I said, Dodger Blue, sister site to Lakers Nation. We appreciate Trevor. He's been a big help to us. There's also a question in there about DJ LeMahieu, Colton Wong as well. So stay tuned with all that. But let's go position by position, and we'll start with kind of, I think, the two most straightforward positions on the roster. We'll start with catcher. I'm a logical guy. We got to go in some sort of order around the diamond.
Yeah,
so we'll start with catcher. Plain and simple, there's no uncertainty here. Will Smith is one of the best catchers in baseball. He is a budding star. Now, I say there's no uncertainty. We know Austin Barnes. We know the role he worked himself into. But let me give you some numbers on Will Smith. Last season, he was 10th among catchers in wins above replacement. He tied for 5th in home runs. He led the position in weighted runs created. He was first in on-base percentage, second in slugging percentage. And if you look at some of the StatCast stuff, his expected on-base and expected slugging were even better than his league-leading marks. He was top 30 in all of baseball in barrel percentage. I was doing this. Will Smith has played 91 career games. How many home runs do you think he's hit in 91 career games, Daniel, if you just had to guess?
At least 20.
23 home runs. So this is a guy who in a 162-game season is on pace for 40 home runs. Now, a lot of times you see a guy come back for this, either struggle as a rookie, or if he kills it as a rookie, he struggles as a sophomore. Shortened season. Right. He hasn't. I mean, he was absolutely unbelievable. He has an OPS over 930 for his career. He's 25 years old. He can't be a free agent for 3 more seasons. And what's crazy to me is that nobody seems to talk about Will Smith. And I get it. We have Mookie Betts. We have Cody Bellinger. We have Corey Seager. We have Buehler. We have Kershaw. We have all of these guys. But let me ask you this. Is Will Smith a star either today or in the future in your mind? Like, is what we are seeing out of Will Smith sustainable? Is he going to get better? Or are you all expecting this to come crashing down at some point?
Yeah, no, I think he's a star, and I agree with you. He kind of gets lost in the mix just because there's so many other great players on this team. But if Will Smith was producing the way he has in his career on like another organization where they don't have as many stars, like he would be the number one guy they would be marketing in that organization. Like his offensive numbers have just been ridiculous, and the only thing that's stopping him from truly reaching that level is he just needs more playing time. And we even saw this past season, like it was pretty much a 50-50 timeshare between Smith and Barnes. We're kind of waiting for Smith to start to edge him out as the season went on and, start playing 3 out of 4 games or 4 out of 5, but it really never happened. And I guess that's a credit to Barnes. He really emerged and was great in the postseason as well. So I guess it's good having 2 catchers that are, starting caliber catchers, but I really want to see Smith make that jump this next season and really become the everyday guy. We know what he could do with the bat. We've seen it. He even in the postseason, he came up. He wasn't great, but he came up with some clutch hits. Arguably the biggest hit of the season, a 3-run home run off Will Smith that kind of turned the tide of that Braves series. So what's really stopping him from being the true everyday catcher, I think, is his defense. Yeah. And that's not saying he's bad defensively, but I think it became pretty clear that a lot of the pitchers preferred throwing to Barnes in the postseason. And maybe that's just because they have more experience with him. So I guess we could, we could be thankful that as hopefully Smith will get better as he catches these guys more and they'll get more comfortable together. That's what I'm hoping for. But I think there's definitely something to what we saw in the postseason. Like if pitchers prefer throwing to Barnes, then I think that's something to consider, and it's something for Smith to work on. I don't know if it's his receiving. I don't know if it's the way he calls games. But those are all things that could definitely improve over time and with experience. And I just think the more he catches these pitchers, the better he's going to get. So I think the sky's the limit for him.
And remember, like the thing is, when we're comparing him to Austin Barnes is arguably the best pitch framer in all of baseball. He's a guy who's been around. He's a guy who has caught big games. He's not young, so to speak, but it's like he's a guy who has the experience. So it's not as if Will Smith is getting sort of benched, which he's not even getting benched because he was DHing basically every time he wasn't catching. But it was for a guy who's elite. And just to put that in context, Austin Barnes, we know his struggles with the bat, right? Like they're well documented.
Yeah.
Yes, his on-base percentage last year got up to 353, which for him is fantastic. His slugging percentage was about 30 points below that. So it's a guy with a higher OPP than slugging. But consider this. He still was number 12 in all of baseball in wins above replacement among catchers. So this is a guy that probably played half-ish of the games. And when I say played, I mean, that's making an appearance. So he hasn't started all those games. He was 12th because that's how good he was defensively. To your point, we saw what happened in the postseason. It's not the first time his playing time increased as the year went on. And really, as soon as they made that shift was when things started to click for the Dodgers. Now, I'm not here to say it was because of that, but clearly, if Austin Barnes can get an on-base percentage of around 350 and a slugging percentage of even just creep that up to like 400, I mean, he's good enough defensively. Offensively, though, Smith is the answer. I was looking it up. I mean, Will Smith is basically as good, if not better, than Yasmani Grandal, who is a notoriously really good. This is a guy who signed a $75 million 4-year deal. Now, we could talk about whether he was worth it, but Grandal was really good. Will Smith is arguably already better than him offensively. Much better than him in the clubhouse by all accounts. Defensively, probably better as well. Now, the interesting thing about catcher, though, is Keibert Ruiz. Okay, so not only do the Dodgers have Will Smith, who's the future star, if not the current star, right? And this is a guy, again, Ken Rosenthal, people like that, Jeff Passan calling him a superstar in the World Series. So you've got Will Smith, you've got Austin Barnes, who was creeping into this superstar's playing time because of his defense, because of his game calling. And then you have Keibert Ruiz, who's the number 2 prospect in the Dodgers system, according to MLB.com. He's 22 years old. This is a guy who's been a top 40 prospect in baseball for the last 2 seasons. He showed up briefly, 2 for 8 with a home run this year. I mean, that's the interesting thing to me, if there is what do you do with this? Because, oh, by the way, the Dodgers have another catcher, Diego Cartaya, who's like 18, who some think is the best of the bunch. And I believe they're on the verge of signing one of the best international free agents, who's a catcher who's like 16. Yep. So they're loaded at a position baseball is not. But how would you handle the Will Smith, Austin Barnes, Keibert Ruiz situation?
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. I mean, we saw that Ruiz is essentially major league ready.
Yeah.
Like you said, he had a cup of coffee this past year, played a few games, hit a home run at Angel Stadium, which was a cool moment. It was in his first at-bat. But I think he really would have benefited from having a full minor league season this past year, which he unfortunately did not get. By all accounts, he's a great defensive catcher. They're just kind of waiting for the bat to come around. He's made a lot of mechanical changes. He's still really young. He's like 21 or 22 or whatever. So yeah, they're not in any rush with him. Like if I feel like they would have no problem sending him to AAA for 1 more year just because he didn't get that this past year. But I also think that he's probably the most likely out of the Dodgers prospects to get traded if they do make some sort of, big trade this winter. Like you said, catcher is a pretty scarce position.
It's a wasteland. Go look at some of the guys starting at catcher in the major leagues.
So I could think about 20 to 25 teams that would happily, take Keibert Ruiz right now, and he would be the top prospect in their organization and their catcher of the future, and maybe
their catcher of the present.
Really bad, they could have him right away, come in and start. So I think he's a guy to watch out for in trades. Yeah. They do have, like you said, Diego Cartaya is just 18 years old, but he could be the best of the bunch by all accounts from the minor league guys that know that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then they also just signed another guy, like you said. So, yeah, there's plenty of catching talent in this organization. Will Smith isn't going anywhere. Yeah. He looks like he's going to be the starter for the next however many years. So I feel like Keibert Ruiz, if anyone, is the most expendable of that bunch. So, I mean, I think if there's, a Nolan Arenado trade or a Josh Hader trade, then I think we could see him as a potential headliner for one of those type of deals.
Yeah, and I mean, the Barnes thing is interesting because I kind of had it penciled in that this might have been Barnes last year. I think he's got 1 more year of arbitration this upcoming year. But as the season halfway through, I was like, this guy can't hit. Yes, he's good defensively, but they've got Ruiz. Right. Now, Barnes, the way he played in the postseason kind of complicated that. I think you're right. I think the Dodgers would like to kick that can down the road because, again, Barnes, I believe, has 1 more year. I could be wrong. It could be 2. But that would make a seamless transition, especially if the DH sticks around. You got Will Smith. He could DH a lot. Cartaya could catch. And if the DH sticks around, and Justin Turner re-signs, Will Smith could DH a lot, and they could carry 3 catchers. So there's a lot of ways that could play out, but it will be interesting. I mean, and to your point, There's lots of teams that could use Keibert Ruiz. The reason I know that is
Yeah.
because Austin Barnes was 12th in wins above replacement among catchers this year,
Yeah,
okay?
exactly.
And number one was a guy named Austin Nola, who like got cut and traded in the middle of the season. So catching
Right.
is a wasteland, but if you want to laugh, go look at who some of the starting catchers are around the league. Well, let's
Yeah.
move. We've got catcher, and the other position that I think the Dodgers, basically, we already know what's going to play, is first base, and that's Max Muncy. Aside from center field and right field, I think first base is the most solid catcher, probably fourth behind that, just because of the Barnes thing. But Max Muncy signed to a 4-year contract with the Dodgers last year so that he could basically buy out his arbitration as well as one free agency year. He's here through 2023, the same as Will Smith. That last year is a club option, but I mean, I could basically pencil in they're going to be wanting that for about 12 or 13 million. He had a weird year in 2020, hit 192 in the regular season, but he did have 12 home runs, just a 389 slugging percentage, though. His slugging percentage, for context, was about 150 points higher the year before and 200 the year before that. He did click a little bit in the postseason. Again, a weird postseason. Watching it, I think a lot of us were disappointed. Then he starts taking walks. By the end of it, he's got an OPS over 900 because the on-base percentage was so high. He did have 3 home runs. We've talked a little bit about his defense. I think he's underrated defensively. He never makes the diving, unbelievable, flashy defensive play, but he also never seems to miss on some of the difficult pick plays. The flip side is when he makes an error, it's about as spectacular of an error as you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, right.
So when he messes up, it's in grand fashion. But I guess when it comes to Muncy, we know the power's there. Any concern with the weird year that he had? I mean, 192, 60 games isn't nothing. I mean, it's half of a season. He hit 192 with the 389 slugging percentage. Any concerns for you with Muncy going forward?
I mean, it was a bit of a regression from the last two, but I'm not overly concerned. Like we still saw in the postseason what he's capable of. He has arguably the best eye on the team. He takes a lot of pitches, so he's working counts, which even if he's not getting hits, that's a plus. He was walking a ton in the postseason, getting on base a lot. So I'm not overly concerned about his batting average in a 60-game season. That if that was a full year, it would have normalized at least a little bit. Like he probably would have got it up to like 230. He's never been a huge batting average guy. Like even his first couple years, he was only batting like 250, 260, and his OBP is a lot higher because he walks a lot. So to me, he's a no-brainer. He's gonna come in and be the starting first baseman, and he does provide a little positional versatility as well.
Yeah.
He can play second in a pinch. He can play third, which I guess is noteworthy right now because the Dodgers don't have a starting third baseman at the moment. So I mean, to me, he's a no-brainer. He's going to be a guy you pencil in the lineup pretty much every day, and most of the time at first base.
Yeah, and you mentioned second base, and Ricky Mesa's got a question in there about Gavin Lux. We're going to get to Gavin Lux, I promise. He's coming up right next. A couple more comments. Victor Burnett says, I think you just got to throw out this year for the stats. I think that's fair.
Yeah.
Weird spring training starts and then stops. You've got the layoff. As we're going to talk about with Lux, some guys dealt with some stuff during that layoff, like COVID, whatever it might be. So I think that's fair. One other question I think that's worth talking about now is Ryan W. asks, is it for sure that the DH isn't going to be in 2021? Still up in the air. Last I heard, still up in the air. I think most people believe it's like sort of a bargaining chip that the owners are trying to dangle in front of the players, but most people seem to think that it will be in the 2021 season. It sounds like definitely in the 2022 season once they have a full collective bargaining agreement, but a couple of those questions. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about the designated hitter once we get to Justin Turner and third base, but that's first base. Edwin Rios can play a little bit of first base. Matt Beatty is probably the primary backup. Justin Turner's a guy they've talked about possibly moving across the diamond at some point if you wanted to shift Muncy to second base. And then, of course, Cody Bellinger is a guy who has played some first base. Whether that continues into the future, I'm not really sure. It seemed like a point where they were trying to get him, like intentionally get him some games at first base to rest or whatever. But Max Muncy is your 90% of the time guy. He can hit lefties. He can hit righties. So he's pretty much an everyday guy. That brings us to second base, and we're sort of inching our way towards the interesting. I think second base, shortstop, and third base are where the drama is. Kiki Hernandez is a free agent. He probably played the most second base of anybody on the Dodgers last year. Fantastic defensively. Offensively, a bit challenged. Yes, he does have power, but the bat has been a little bit of a roller coaster. Used to be a lefty masher, kind of lost a little bit of that, and then, who knows what happened. Obviously, he hits the huge home run in Game 7 of the NLCS, a home run we'll never forget. Obviously a positive guy in the clubhouse, but as of right now, he's a free agent. So, second base. This was a position that was penciled in to Gavin Lux, formerly a top 5 prospect in Major League Baseball, probably still a top 5 prospect in Major League Baseball. He was supposed to be the second baseman last year. I would describe his 2020 as just about everything that could have gone wrong for Gavin Lux did. This is a guy who's young. I believe he just turned 22. Is that right? Maybe 23. We share a birthday. I should know exactly what day, how old he turned, but he was on the COVID list. We don't know if he tested positive. He chose not to reveal whether it was a positive test or sort of a close contact, but he misses the beginning of summer camp. Then he struggles once he gets there, can't throw the ball to first. His batting is all a mess. And so he ends up going to the alternate site. We don't really get to see him. He pops back into Los Angeles a couple times into the lineup. He was on the wild card series roster. He got like a random at bat in one of those playoff games. But the moral of the story is 2020 was a wash for a guy that many people thought was going to break out. So the question I think for Dodger fans to ask is, where do you stand on second base? Is second base Gavin Lux's position to lose? Like, do you have him penciled in as the starter? And then I guess the second question I would ask, and I asked this to Justin Lorber, was, are you more confident, less confident, or equally as confident in Gavin Lux today as you were a year ago?
Yeah. And I highly recommend that episode with Justin Lorber, Future Dodgers, if you haven't watched yet. It's very informative. I don't exactly follow the farm system 100%, so I rely on him for a lot of my knowledge there, and he's just awesome. So if you haven't watched that one yet, I highly recommend it. But yeah, Gavin Lux, I'd say I'm the same. I feel like 2020 is just the year you kind of throw out with him. 2019, he was absolutely ridiculous, arguably, the best player in all of minor league baseball. He got called up in September. He was just 21. He didn't do anything crazy for the Dodgers, but he ended up making the postseason roster, hit a home run in the postseason. By the end of that year, he was like the consensus number 1 or number 2 prospect in all of baseball. So this year was just a weird year for him. Like you said, he showed up to summer camp late, never quite got going. We don't really know what happened at the alternate site, so we don't know how he looked there. So it's hard to really judge him. He obviously didn't fare well in the games if you look at the numbers, but it was such a small sample size that it's hard to take anything from that. I'm still high on him long term. I think he's going to be, the second baseman of the future. I don't know. He originally was a shortstop, but we saw some defensive issues with his arm. And if he can't throw the ball from second base, he probably can't throw it from short. I know Justin mentioned they could potentially move him to the outfield long term.
Yeah.
He's definitely athletic enough to do that, so maybe he ends up in left field. But I don't know if you could just pencil him in as the starting second baseman going into next year. But I also think you have to at least give him a chance to win the job in spring training. So. If all goes to plan and he's healthy, I think we'll see. He'll probably lead the Cactus League in at bats. Hopefully, we'll see a lot of them. And if he succeeds, I think he definitely can win that job. I don't think they're going to bring in, a high-profile second baseman like you mentioned, DJ LeMahieu. I'd be pretty surprised if they signed him. It'd be cool. He's a great player, but I'm not expecting that.
Yeah.
So I think second base is going to be a mixture of, Gavin Lux, Chris Taylor, who wound up pretty much being their starter there in the postseason. Maybe Max Muncy slots over. If Kike's back, obviously he'll be in the mix. But I don't think we're going to see, one starting second baseman as we will see with a lot of other positions, unless Gavin Lux turns into, the guy we think he could be. That would be the only, everyday guy that I could think of. So we're just in kind of wait and see mode with him, I feel like.
Yeah. And when I was a pro LeMahieu guy. I think if LeMahieu comes, he'd be playing third base. I think that's kind of the position the Dodgers are probably figuring out. He's a guy who's played first base, second base, third base. To me, second base, to your point, I'm not saying Gavin Lux just has the job and it's his, no matter what happens. But I think he's for sure at the top of the list. Alex Gonzalez in the chat makes a good point. Same people who want Lux gone are the people who wanted Seager gone. I'm not quite sure. I mean, Seager was great the moment that he came up, which is unique. I mean, I should say what Lux struggling is kind of the unique thing. Like the Dodgers have had these guys like Bellinger, Seager, even a guy like Puig, who just come up and kill it right away. I mean, that's not the norm. Like Dodger fans are spoiled in that's not the norm. And add in COVID and a shortened season and all of the expectations placed on Gavin Lux. I think there's a lot of reason to understand why it played out the way that it did. Personally, I'm really high on Gavin Lux. I mean, for me, There's no reason to be less high on him today, again, because I think you can wipe everything out that happened. Not just because it was 2020, but I mean, again, this was a guy that was on the COVID list. So he was behind the 8 ball, add in the pressure, add in being a young guy, the whole deal. So I think Gavin Lux is a guy. When I look down the list of possible second basemen for the Dodgers, admittedly, it's a little concerning. I mean, McKinstry is very unproven. Again, Justin had some thoughts on him. He's not really a heavy bat guy. I mean, like it's a little bit of batting average, but it's not going to be a power bat there. Chris Taylor, they tend to not want to just sort of pencil into one spot. They want to have flexibility to give guys days off, that kind of thing. And so if you move those two guys, I mean, you could move Muncy over, and then you've got Matt Beatty at first base. I mean, the options beyond sort of Gavin Lux are not great. Like, I think Gavin Lux, the ceiling is so much higher than any other option the Dodgers have. So I think Lux is the second baseman. I think we're both in agreement that if we had to guess at the beginning of the season, it's probably going to be Gavin Lux. I think he gets the first shot. Of course, if spring training is a disaster, so be it. But I definitely think it. I mean, Ryan W. says second has been our biggest hole in the lineup. I mean, it depends on who's there. If Chris Taylor's there or not, but yeah, to the point of if Chris Taylor's playing left or if Chris Taylor's playing short that day. So we'll see. But I think I'm expecting big things. I know you were big on Corey Seager. We were both kind of big. You were more vocal on Corey Seager. I'm big on Gavin Lux. I mean, that's a guy that I would be targeting if you're in a fantasy baseball league or something like that. Not to give away my tips to Daniel, who's in the fantasy baseball league I'm in, but I'm pro Gavin Lux. I think
I actually have his keeper rights if I want.
There you go.
Him, so
there you go. So maybe you should. Maybe I'm trying to talk you into keeping him. But yeah, so Lupe Aguilar asks, what relievers are the Dodgers looking at? Hang tight on that question. Tonight, we're going to focus mostly on the infield. We'll leave some time at the end for questions. So if you want to ask questions like that, hang tight. But let's move to shortstop. Daniel, I don't know if you knew this. The Dodgers have one of the best shortstops in baseball. The question is, how long will they have said shortstop for? We all know how good Corey Seager was last season, finally healthy, not to mention how he performed in the postseason, NLCS MVP, World Series MVP. The question is, I think with Seager is it sustainable? This is a guy who's had a hip injury. This is a guy who's had a back injury. This is a guy who's had Tommy John surgery. He was great as a rookie in 2016. He struggled in 2017, 18, and 19, mostly and in part because of those injuries. But it's an interesting question, and I'll tie this conversation about shortstop in with third base, because is Corey Seager the shortstop in 2021? Yes, of course, like, end of story. The drama comes for what goes down the road. So let's tie this in. The Dodgers currently have a hole at third base because Justin Turner's a free agent. The common consensus out there in the media is that Justin Turner will be re-signed, but there are rumors of different directions the Dodgers might go. So obviously the easy one would be to re-sign Turner, run it back exactly as you have. The others are the trade rumors. Francisco Lindor has been rumored. Nolan Arenado has been rumored. Even Chris Bryant is a guy that many people think might get traded. So those are all out there. The other option would be you could just bring Corey Seager back for a year, and then at the end of the year, you could explore the free agent market. In addition to Seager, Trevor Story, Lindor, Carlos Correa, Javi Baez will all be free agents at the same time. So I guess for me, what you do at shortstop and what you do at third base are very related. Those two things are very related, because I think if you're going to make a trade, it's probably at third base. You ride out the season with Corey Seager. So there's a lot of different directions we could take this. Corey Seager's the shortstop for 2021. My understanding is you're pro bring back Justin Turner and not necessarily go out and make a trade for a guy like Arenado, a guy like Bryant, a guy like Lindor, which, by the way, I mean, Lindor could theoretically come in and you could find a way to play both those guys together in 2021. But you're pro bring back Justin Turner and extend Corey Seager. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. To me, that just makes the most sense. I think Turner's still got a lot left in the tank. We saw in the postseason how big he was on both sides of the ball. Like, I feel like there were talks about his defense declining, but from what I saw in the postseason, he was as good as can be at third base. So to me, he just means too much to this organization to not bring him back. Like, it would be weird seeing Justin Turner in a different uniform. He does so much for the local community. He's from Long Beach, so we know he loves LA. So I feel like that's the most likely scenario. I think something would seriously have to go wrong for him not to be back next year, and that would be pretty disappointing. But that's not to say that I'm not, that I would be against trading for Arenado or Chris Bryant or Lindor and moving Seager to third. Like, if they do any of those things, I'm gonna be, really happy too, because those are all great players. But I just think there's better ways to improve the roster. Like if you re-sign Justin Turner, you're going to be saving some money as opposed to trading for an Arenado or a Lindor, who's also a free agent a year from now.
Yeah.
So to me, I think it just makes the most sense to bring back Turner and then use that extra money to address some other needs like the bullpen.
And just to clarify in the comments, nobody here is suggesting Carlos Correa as a guy the Dodgers want to sign. I think Daniel and I share similar feelings to all of you about the name Carlos Correa. I just simply mention him as one of the multitude of free agent shortstops a year from now. Nobody here is advocating for Carlos Correa. I can assure you of that. But yeah. I guess I would frame it. Let me frame it this way. If you had the choice between Francisco Lindor, Chris Bryant, Nolan Arenado, or Corey Seager, if you could have one of those four players for the next, let's say, 6 seasons, including 2021, taking off your Dodger fandom, your Corey Seager love, your Corey Seager glasses, all the Corey Seager things that you wear, Daniel, I mean, Corey Seager's the youngest, okay? So he's just under 27. Lindor is 5 months older than him. Chris Bryant's 2 years older. Arenado's 3 years older. So we're all talking about guys under the age of 30, between about 26 and a half and 29 and a half. Is Corey Seager the guy that you would prefer, all things equal, between those four?
To me, it's really close between Seager and Lindor. Like you said, they're the 2 youngest, so I'm always going to give a slight edge to the younger guys because you get more of their prime years. Whereas Arenado, who is now north of 30, and he's been great, obviously. But we don't know what the back half of his career is going to look like. He's been healthy for the most part, but that could end up playing against you. That means he's got a lot of mileage on his legs, so we don't know what he's going to look like in 3-4 years from now. Seager, obviously, the only concern with Seager is the injuries. He's had a bunch of them. 2020 was really the first time he stayed healthy for a full season in a while, and that wasn't even a full season. It was only 60 games. So I think it's fair to be concerned about his health moving forward. And that's the only reason why it's not, a slam dunk Corey Seager for me. But at the end of the day, he's still the guy I want from that bunch. We saw what he's capable of this season, and specifically in the postseason where he was the best player on the planet. So, I mean, for me, he's still the guy. And I think there's something to it that he is already a Dodger and he came up with the Dodgers. Like, I love the homegrown guys. So for me, that makes a difference as opposed to just bringing in someone from the outside who's already a great established player. Yeah. So I've leaned Seager slightly ahead of Lindor, but I'm also a big Francisco Lindor fan. So I mean, you can't go wrong with him. He's better than Seager defensively. I'd say Seager has a better bat. But they're both great players, but I slightly lean towards Seager.
Yeah, let us know. I mean, I've seen a couple people say, hey, we like Seager. Obviously, a couple people mentioning Scott Boras as the agent is not a plus when it comes to Seager. Although Andy McCullough had a great piece on The Athletic, if you subscribe there, on Corey Seager today. It was fantastic. And he did point out that Xander Bogaerts is a Scott Boras contract who plays shortstop and who had signed a big extension, 6 years, $120 million, heading into his free agency year. So it's not out of the question. But let us know what you think. Pika Peep says Lindor, all-around better player. Justin Gomez asked if we can get Puig back. Trust me, man. If anybody's campaigning for Puig, it'd be me. I'll go get my Puig jersey right now if we need to do that. But this was interesting, okay? So I looked at the careers of all four of these guys. And just, again, to clarify, Corey Seager's 26 and a half. Lindor is 27. Bryant is just a tad over 28. And Nolan Arenado is about 29 and a half. So we've got four guys within 3 years of each other. I looked at just their total wins above replacement accumulated, divided by the total games played, then multiplied out over a season. So basically over 162 games, what are these guys averaging wins above replacement? Now I'm going to play a game with you, Daniel. I'll put you on the spot. I haven't given you prep for this, but I think you can handle this. Of those four, Lindor, Bryant, Arenado, and Seager, who do you think has the lowest average wins above replacement? Now again, this is per game. So a guy, like, keep that in mind. So if a guy misses time, he's not actually penalized on the wins above replacement scale. But because I'm factoring in for different ages, who do you think of those four lowest wins above replacement per game?
I'm going to say Chris Bryant.
Okay, incorrect. It's actually Nolan Arenado. Now, that surprised me. But the reason is he had 2 rough years to start his career. He probably came up a little bit too early and struggled. And then also, I didn't really realize this, but wins above replacement kind of punishes Coors Field. They do park factored stuff, And so they take down a ton off of Coors Field. So Arenado, and it's by a lot, actually. He averages 4.8 wins above replacement per 162 games. His high was only 5.9. His low was 4.5 in 2015. So keep that in mind. His high was 5.9. That is lower than these other three guys' average, which is fascinating to me because I might pick Arenado out of these four. Wins above replacement does not help. Now, who do you think has the highest? Two guys are tied for second, and then who do you think has the highest wins above replacement?
I'll say Lindor has the highest.
Okay. It's your boy, Chris Bryant. The highest wins above replacement goes to your boy.
Kidding.
I joke your boy, because if I'm remembering right, you've posted on Twitter that you're not a big Chris Bryant fan. Is that accurate?
I mean, I have nothing against him. I just don't think he is like the top tier of players in the league.
I was shocked.
Yeah.
So he averages 6.2 wins above replacement per 162 games. In part, 2016, 7.9 wins above replacement. His lowest was in 2017. He bounced back a little bit in 2019, was really, really bad in 2020. He was on pace for like 2.5 wins above replacement. So he was at 6.2. Lindor and Seager both tied at about 6.02. Lindor, a high of 7.6, a low of 4.4. Corey Seager, high of 6.9, low of 3.3. So it's fascinating to look at those guys. Again, I think Arenado's hurt because of Coors Field, but we're talking about four guys that are all pretty comparable, I would say. Again, I think Arenado might be the best, and this number reflects poorly. Lindor's fascinating because his offensive numbers, when you really dig in, he's kind of like Mookie Betts for me in that I just hear how great he is, and I just assume like, yeah, he's great. But I don't get a chance to watch a ton of Indians games. And so when you look at his numbers, his offensive stuff is actually pretty underwhelming. I would much rather have Seager to Lindor because I'm with you. I think Seager's defense is fine. Obviously, the Dodgers keep being rumored with Lindor, so there's some sort of affection there. But Chris Bryant's interesting. I think he's probably the least costly of the four, just because maybe the shine has worn off a little bit on Chris Bryant. His best year was in 2016. Now, because of that, maybe does he have it going forward? But it's interesting. Right. I mean, if it was for me, if I could get Nolan Arenado for cheap, knowing that I've got him signed, that's appealing to me. The flip side is I can't imagine Corey Seager gets the per year value that Nolan Arenado is currently signed for, like $34 million a year. So those are all things that run through my mind. I would be thrilled if Corey Seager was on the Dodgers for the next 10 years. But I do have to admit that making this decision based only off of 2020 is really worrisome because a guy at 26 and a half who's already had elbow surgery, a back injury, and a hip injury. I mean, those are like old man injuries for the most part. That worries me a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the question you have to ask yourself before you give Seager that big deal is, what position is he going to play? Like, obviously, he was great at shortstop this year and has been throughout his career, but playing that position at his size, he's 6'4", that's probably contributed to some of the injuries. Yeah. So I think maybe if you think he's either a third baseman or maybe even a first baseman, then that can maybe help keep him healthy. And then obviously you love that. If Corey Seager's healthy, he's one of the top 10 players in baseball. So I think before you sign him long-term, maybe you even have to ask him that question, because I'm sure if he's a free agent, he's going to want some input there. So I mean, if you want to stick him at shortstop for the next 8 years, then maybe you're going to have to deal with the back injuries and the hamstring injuries. Whereas at first base, he could kind of just chill there and maybe stay healthy. So that's definitely something to consider. Whereas with the other guys, those guys are kind of more set in their position.
Yeah. And I mean, and that hurts his value, right? Like if Corey Seager's a first baseman and not a shortstop, I mean, his bat still is elite at first base, but relative to everything else going on around him, it's not. Now, what's fascinating with Seager specifically is I think Gavin Lux plays a major part in this conversation. Yeah. I think if Gavin Lux had played in 2020 and been everything the Dodgers were hoping he would be, I think it probably changes the narrative a little bit. But now the Dodgers don't have a cheap backup option. It's like, sure, you can negotiate difficult with Seager and say, hey, you know what? Here's where we're at, whatever the number is. I think it's going to be higher than Bogart's 6 for 120, like a lot higher than that. I think it's probably lower than what Arenado has left, to like the 6,200. So somewhere in the middle, maybe something like 26, 27 million, 28, maybe creeping up towards 30. But if you don't know, I mean, the hard part for him is if he says no, say that's fine. We'll just go get Lindor then in a year, or we'll trade for Lindor, or we'll go get Story in a year, or pick your, I would prefer Seager to all those guys, but it is interesting with all those shortstops hitting the market at the same time. And to your point, he is the most likely of all the guys I mentioned to not be able to stick it out at shortstop. That has been the narrative, at least. Now, I think he's silenced that narrative with the way he has played of late. But I mean, what do you realistically? I mean, you and I aren't cap experts here, but 6 for 120 is low. I can't imagine he's going to get $35 million. Because of the depressed economy. Stan Kasten in that article McCullough wrote said the Dodgers lost about $100 million. Now you got to take their word for it there, but we know the Dodgers are reliant on attendance, and none, that wasn't allowed. Not to say the Dodgers are poor and they need to be pinching pennies here, but for what it's worth. But with the depressed economy and all of those shortstops hitting the market at the same time, plus his injury history, what would be a number you'd be comfortable at for Seager? I mean, we talking 8 years?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like his value is definitely going to be hurt just by the fact that there's so many great shortstops out there, and like you said, probably not a lot of teams spending money. Even in a normal year, I feel like MLB teams are really frugal with their money, and now even more so because of the pandemic. So I think they could get him at 25, 26 a year for 7 years. He'll be 27 when he's a free agent, so that would go through his age 34 season.
Yeah.
Maybe there's an opt-out or two mixed in there. So I don't know what that math comes out to, but I'll say 7 years at like $26 million a year sounds maybe obtainable. But I guess it depends on what kind of year he has next year, because if he comes out and has a year like he did in 2020 and stays healthy for all of 2021, then I think that number is only going to go up.
Yeah, I mean, would you give him that money right now, or would you say, hey, I want to see a couple months of the 2020 season first? I mean, like, how confident? I mean, so you're talking about 185, if my math is right, is where you're at. Right. Are you comfortable giving him that contract today, or do you kind of want to see an offseason and see him come back for a couple months next year?
If he'd be willing to do that, I would do that today, just because you're buying out a year of arbitration, so he's already probably going to be making a decent amount after the year he just had. So it's really only a 6-year extension then, and for me, if he's able to stay healthy in 2021, then that number's only going to go up. So it's possible you could sign him to that extension, and then a year from now you're looking at it as a discount. So I mean, it's also possible that he gets hurt, another season-ending injury, and you're saying, oh no, we have this guy who's injury prone for 7 more years. So that obviously wouldn't be ideal. But to me, I would do it. I'd rather do it sooner rather than later, because I think that number is only going to go up the longer you wait.
Yeah, the McCullough piece, again, I mean, I keep referencing it. It literally came out today all about Corey Seager. And his thing was Andrew Friedman values flexibility. And they never want to be backed into a corner. And he talked a lot about how the Red Sox kind of won a title and then 2 years later were tearing it down because of some really bad decisions they made financially. Friedman wants to avoid that. But one of the things he said was Friedman values flexibility. He talked about, well, if they sign Corey Seager, then that probably means something for Cody Bellinger, which means something for Walker Buehler, 2 and 3 years from now. But what's interesting is if you think about that phrase, he values flexibility. To me, that sounds like a guy that looks at the market and says, flexibility is just waiting a year from now. Because I don't have to commit anything to Corey Seager, see how the next 12 months play out, and knowing that Lindor is out there. And I mean, and if Lindor doesn't get traded, we know the Indians aren't going to go re-sign him. So we know he wants out of there, and then it just becomes, can we be the highest bidder? The same with Trevor Story. I mean, Trevor Story, probably a guy Colorado would like to re-sign, but at the same time, it's not like he's probably loyal to that organization based on how things have played out. So to me, the flexibility argument leads me to believe that maybe Friedman lets this play out. I mean, he probably has a number where I would guess he's made an offer to Scott Boras. He said, here's our number. 7 years, maybe it's a 7-year extension, so it's an 8-year deal. Maybe it's a 6-year extension, whatever it is. Maybe it's like 6/160. And he says, this is our number. If you're not cool with it, then that's fine. We'll just play out the year and see what happens. But it is interesting to think about. And again, not to stack dominoes, but they have Mookie Betts locked up for a ton of money forever. If they sign Corey Seager to a similar deal, then you've got Bellinger up next in 2023 and Walker Buehler in 2024. Can they carry 4 $28 million plus players? That's a question. So it's something to think about. But let me shift real quick to Justin Turner. We got a little bit of time left on the show. We've talked a little bit. I think a lot of the projections are $10 to $12 million, maybe $14 million for a guy like Justin Turner. You say you don't think he's lost a ton. I mean, obviously he's getting older. We know he can't catch up to the fastball, but what have you seen from him that makes you think the next 2 years would still be World Series champion, starting third baseman, sort of platoon DH quality from Justin Turner?
I mean, I just look at the season he had in 2020. Yes, his power was down, but he was still getting on base at a really high clip. So it's not like with age, your plate discipline is going to go anywhere.
Yeah.
We know Justin Turner still puts together one of the most consistently best at bats in baseball. He's always working counts. So just having him in that lineup is huge. And as far as the defense goes, it was just the eye test for me. I don't even know if the numbers back it up.
Yeah.
He wasn't spectacular defensively in the regular season, but we saw when it mattered most, he kind of took it to another gear, and he made so many big plays throughout that postseason run. Obviously, the one that comes to mind is when he dove and tags Dansby Swanson and then got up and threw it to third right away. But he was just making every routine play and also, you know, some of the tougher ones. So I think he's got at least one more year at third base, and then if it's a 2-year deal and he's not great the last year, like, so be it. Or, you know, with the DH, he could start DHing a lot more. You mentioned first base. Maybe he moves over there.
Yeah.
So I don't think if you're looking at giving Justin Turner a 2 years, 24 million, somewhere in that range, I don't think that's something you're going to be like, oh no, this is a disaster. Like, why did we do this? Like, it's not a long-term deal. So I think he's got at least one good year left in him, and then if you get a second good year, like, that's just gravy as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll throw this out to those joining us on YouTube and Facebook and Periscope, by the way. We're going to end the last 5 minutes or so with some mailbag questions. So if you've got questions, throw those in the chat as we kind of finish up this Justin Turner conversation. But yeah, I mean, some of the contracts that Dodger fans have most hated are, you know, a guy like Joe Kelly, where you feel like you overpaid and he's just been a massive disappointment. You know, Kenley Jansen would probably be worst case scenario. That was like a 4-year deal, if I'm not mistaken. And again, he's 5 years, and he signed at the same time Turner did. Turner signed a 4-year deal.
Yeah.
So you don't hate, I mean, and again, Jansen, you probably dislike sort of because of what we've seen most recently, and also because of he's being asked to be the closer. You know, Justin Turner got help from Corey Seager in a way that Kenley Jansen hasn't really gotten out of anybody in there. So it will be interesting. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, 1 or 2 years, that doesn't mess with your long-term plans. It doesn't impact your ability to go re-sign a guy like Corey Seager or do anything. And he is such a positive clubhouse guy. And the last thing is the Dodgers consistently build their team for the postseason. You know, every time they re-signed Rich Hill, I remember I would see the comments like, oh, this guy sucks. He only gives you 15 starts a year, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, the Dodgers don't care about the 15 regular season starts. The Dodgers only care about the fact that this guy absolutely crushes it and shows up when they need him to in the postseason. And so I think Justin Turner's the same way. I mean, this is a guy, we talked about it in one of the shorts I did on should the Dodgers re-sign Turner. I mean, game 5 of the NLCS through the end of the World Series, he was absolutely on fire. He had something like 4 home runs and 4 doubles, something like that. So he came up clutch when they needed it, and Justin Turner's huge. So, yeah, well, let's get to a couple of these questions, and then we'll be out of here. Again, we appreciate you joining us. Well, we're going to be on here at 9 p.m. every Monday night for the foreseeable future, so we appreciate you joining us. Again, subscribe to Dodger Blue 1958 on YouTube if you're not already. Make sure you click the notification bell, because we're going to start releasing breaking news stories as they come out, that kind of thing. Have rapid-fire 5-minute little video analysis either with myself or Daniel as well. So let's look through some of these. Re-signing Blake Trinan. We're obviously going to get away from the infield stuff a little bit here. We'll just do this quickly. Thumbs up or thumbs down for you on Blake Trinan?
For me, it's thumbs up if it's, you know, a reasonable price. I wouldn't be overpaying him on a 3-4 year deal, but if it's a 1 or 2 year deal at, you know, 7-8 million a year or whatever, I think that's very reasonable. We saw how big he was for them, pitching at pretty much every game and getting some big outs. So I think he's a guy that you could potentially be, you know, getting some saves for the Dodgers. He's closed in the past. So I would prioritize Blake Trinan. But we also saw a rumor this past week that maybe, you know, they want to bring in Brad Hand on a similar 1-year type deal that they did with Blake Trinan last year. So I also wouldn't be opposed to that. Brad Hand's, really good too. So
Yeah.
I think there's plenty of options on the relief market that they don't need to overpay for any of
Yeah.
these guys, and they could still get, 1 or 2 good ones.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the same boat. I like Trinan. I'd probably prefer a guy like Liam Hendricks who has a little bit more upside. I'd prefer a trade for a guy like Josh Hader. I'd take Trinan over Hand just because I'm big on known quantity. Like, we've seen him in the system. We've seen him pitch for the Dodgers. We've seen him in the World Series. Like, just give me that over a guy like Brad Hand with who knows. So that's where I'd go there. A couple questions on starting pitching. Trevor Bauer or going after a guy like Blake Snell, who's been rumored to be available. We know the Dodgers have sort of 6 starting pitchers right now. They've got Kershaw, David Price expected to be back, Walker Buehler, Dustin May, Tony Gonsolin, Julio Urias. Their number 1 prospect, Josiah Gray, probably not ready at the beginning of this year, maybe towards the end, definitely in 2 years. Any interest in you in going after a Trevor Bauer, trying to acquire a guy like Blake Snell?
I mean, I would have interest, but I'm not expecting them to. I think Bauer is going to be too expensive. And he's also, as much as I love him, he's got question marks as far as the clubhouse stuff. I mean, he would be great in the Dodgers rotation if you're looking at, Walker Buehler, Clayton Kershaw, and Trevor Bauer. That's as good as it gets in baseball. So that, as great as that sounds, I don't think it's going to happen. We just talked about how they got to pay Corey Seager and Buehler and Bellinger and all those guys. So I don't think they're going to give $35 million a year to Trevor Bauer. Blake Snell, he would be great in the rotation as well, but I don't think they really need a top end guy like that where you're giving up top prospects.
Yeah.
So I'm not expecting a Blake Snell trade. I think if the Dodgers add to the starting rotation, it would just be a depth type arm, like just to add a back of the rotation type of guy that you could have some depth.
Do you happen to have a name in mind there, Daniel, of a guy that you'd like to see signed in that?
I mean, Rich Hill, we just talked about, be my guy for that role. You could get him for like a year and $3 million, super cheap. He could come in, like you said, who cares what he does in the regular season, but in the postseason, we've seen what he's capable of. So I think Dick Mountain's got one last ride, one last year. Let's get him a ring. That would be my preference.
I mean, I saw somebody talk about Alex. I would take Dick Mountain over Alex Wood 1,000 times out of 1,000 and not even think twice about it. So Roger Batten asks, anyone in the minors who can help in the bullpen? Again, I'm going to point you back to last week's show. Justin Lorber was on. We talked about all of the prospects who could contribute. There are a couple pitchers that were protected from the Rule 5, some guys he likes in there. So please be sure to check that out. Let's see. Good. Philip Choi, thanks. You said you just subscribed. We appreciate that. Please subscribe.
Thank you.
Add to the notifications. Matt Moreno chiming in on Periscope here. He says Dodgers should absolutely re-sign Trinan. So there you go. Matt Moreno.
There we go.
Trevor May, THP Knob asked about Trevor May. He's a reliever that I know Justin Lorber is really high on. If you probably watch that, he's big on Trevor May. I admittedly don't know a ton about him. But I know the peripherals, the StatCast, the spin rate, that kind of stuff. They love that guy. I'm all for bullpen help. I mean, like, I'm not going to say no to any quality bullpen arms. Anything particular about Trevor May that you know or like, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, everything I'm going off is what Justin said in that last episode. But Trevor May is a 4-seam vertical fastball guy which there's not a lot of that in the Dodgers bullpen. They have a lot of sinker ballers right now. So I know Andrew Friedman said at the beginning of the offseason that's one thing they're looking for is just varying looks out of the bullpen, guys with, different arm slots or different type of movement on their balls. So I think he would be a good addition. He had a great year in 2020. He could probably be had for cheaper than the Trinans in the hands of the world. So that's definitely a guy to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And this is a big question. So Richard Gerard asked about the best closer available. I mean, it's probably as a free agent, Liam Hendricks. I think Brad Hand probably second, Blake Trinan maybe third. There are rumors of Josh Hader potentially being available in a trade. We've talked about that on past videos. Bruce Davis asks, and this is something that's come up actually a handful of times, Julio Urias as a closer. This was kind of mentioned in passing again by Andy McCullough, I believe, in a previous post. He kind of mentioned it. Now, Andy's plugged in. This is a guy who was a beat writer for the Dodgers and is now a national guy. So I don't think he says something like that. I could be wrong, but I don't think he just says that casually without having some inkling that it's being talked about. My immediate reaction was Urias doesn't have closer stuff. Typically, closers have either one absolutely wipeout pitch or they're throwing 100 miles an hour. Urias, I mean, I think he touched 97 in the last pitch of the World Series, and that was as hard as we've ever seen him throw. Obviously, he would offer you sort of a plethora of pitches, different types of pitches that he could throw. I still think Urias has upside as a really, really good starting pitcher. That's my fear there. But what do you think? Urias as a closer, is that a road that you want to go down?
Yeah, well, let me just echo your thoughts on McCullough. He's really plugged in with the organization, so he wouldn't just throw that out there out of
Yeah.
nowhere. So that was it was surprising to me, but I think it makes some sense. We saw he's got the pulse to be a closer. Like when he came in those games, like there was no one calmer than
Yeah.
him, and I think that's
That
important
matters.
for a closer. And I also think we've seen his injury history. He's had some arm issues, so that would be kind of a good way to limit his innings throughout the regular season. And then in the postseason, he kind of becomes this
Yep.
weapon where maybe you can throw him 2 or 3 innings at a time, and that's really valuable in the postseason. With that being said, though, I would still leave him in the rotation. I think his upside there is still really high as well. He's still really young. Like, this is a guy who I feel like we've known him for like half a decade now because he came up so early, but he's still only like 24 years old. I think he could still start games for them and be a top, a number 2, number 3 type starter. So I would still leave him in the rotation. I just think that's more valuable over the course of this season.
Totally. I mean, and a lot of people mentioned Gratterall as another name possibly for the closer. Obviously, he has the stuff. He has the velocity that we're talking about. He has secondary stuff that is nasty. Him and Dustin May both. The eye test, you watch him pitch and you're like, oh my goodness, it's like videos that you just want to retweet. And then the flip side is those two guys had like the 2 lowest strikeout rates of anybody on the Dodgers. So they're incredibly young. A lot of that probably has to do with just hitting your spots, knowing how to sequence your pitches, that kind of thing. So I think there's hope for Gratterall. There's hope for May, more so on the starter side. But I think Gratterall, they would love for him to be the closer for the next 5 years. We just haven't seen it yet. With that said, I would prefer to let him try it this year and keep Urias in the rotation. I think you make a good point. You could use Urias as a starter all regular season and then use him as your bullpen weapon as well. But if it were me, I would just go out and get somebody in the meantime. Matt Moreno adds one last thing. Lance Lynn is available again. He's a guy the Dodgers were connected to.
He is.
Sort of at the trade deadline last year. Obviously, he had an additional year on his contract. Thumbs up or thumbs down, any interest in Lance Lynn, starting pitcher who has older guy, but has put together some really quality seasons.
Yeah, I would be interested for sure. And first of all, why did the Rangers not trade him at the deadline?
Yeah.
Like, waiting until now, the price is only going down. Like, now you only get him for 1 year and 1 postseason instead of having him for 2 postseasons.
Yeah.
So it didn't make sense at the time, and it makes even sense less sense now that he's on the block again. But to me, I'm going to say the same thing I did on Lynn as I did at the deadline. I would not overpay for him, but if the price is right and you don't have to give up a lot, I think that's a really quality arm to add.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, they have 6 starters. That sounds like a lot. I mean, a lot of teams get past their 6. So I think I would prefer to stick with the 6 guys they have and go sign a Rich Hill or, I mean, even Alex Wood. I'll say an Alex Wood type. I'm not an Alex Wood guy. Yeah. Although, hey, he helped win the World Series, played significant role. So I'll give him credit there. But I think that's where I would go. I want to get as many innings as we can for Gonsolin, May, and Urias. You probably already don't have enough for those guys as well. Obviously, a couple people mentioned David Price is kind of a wild card. He opted out of last season.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. I mean, all signs are that he wants to play this upcoming year, but there's a chance he doesn't. Yeah. And then if he opts out again, you've got 5 starting pitchers. Josiah Gray probably not ready. The Dodgers do have a bunch of young arms. A couple guys, their top 3 draft picks this last year were all pitchers. They've got some other guys that they like. And so definitely some people to keep an eye on. But for me, if we were going to use resources, even if it's in a trade, I would much rather those resources go towards Nolan Arenado type deal or a Josh Hader type deal. Because again, I mean, the Nolan Arenado price tag trade-wise is going to be low because he's essentially a guy who's got 1 year left on his deal. He can opt out at the end of the season. Unless you're the Dodgers, he's probably opting out of that. The Dodgers could theoretically make an agreement to have him opt in. I don't know if you'd want that. Maybe you say, hey, we want you to opt in and renegotiate because we don't really want to pay that much. I kind of think the Dodgers would almost prefer to let him ride it out in Colorado, opt out and then re-sign him for a much lower price tag, but we'll see how that plays out. So Mitch White, that's Philip Choi mentions. That's another name that has been thrown out there. Chris Archer is a free agent who, I mean, I'd take a flyer on Chris Archer. Maybe that's just all my fantasy wounds that I've had from Chris Archer over the years in fantasy baseball, but we'll see. So, hey, we appreciate.
I mean, I wanted the Dodgers to trade for Archer in like 2014.
Thank goodness
so,
they didn't.
Hey.
Thank goodness they didn't. But who knows? Maybe the Dodgers could figure. I mean, he's a guy that's like, you look at the stuff. Maybe you convert him into a high leverage reliever. Who knows? But anyways, well, hey, we appreciate you all joining us. This has been a lot of fun. Again, we're going to be here every Monday night at 9 p.m. Check out Trevor Lane and Lakers Nation at 8 p.m. Then switch over and join us as soon as they're done at 9 p.m. We appreciate you all. That's Daniel Stark and I'm Jeff Spiegel. Make sure you're subscribed, Dodger Blue 1958 on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Check out DodgerBlue.com for breaking news. And again, on YouTube, make sure you've got the notification bell rung because we are going to be posting daily videos starting this week. We appreciate you all. And as always, as I love to close out the show because I can, just remember, still champs!